right, so today we're going to talk about some of the different forms of government. So we're going to start off with who can participate in the governing process within these different forms of government. So when it comes to democracy, the political authority rests with the people. Governing is only done with the consent of the people. And I think Abraham Lincoln says it best: government of the people, by the people, for the people. With democracy, we have two different types. We have direct democracy and indirect democracy. With direct democracy, the will of the people is translated into public policy directly through mass public meetings. This is also known as a pure democracy, and it can really only work in small communities where it's really easy for people to meet and where there are very few problems or issues to discuss, and it does not exist anywhere at the national level today. An indirect democracy is what we actually have here in the U.S. People are chosen to act as representatives for those people and express the popular feelings of the people they represent. So again, we as Americans are given the opportunity to vote for these representatives, and our government is known as one of popular consent, and the people rule. Dictatorships, on the other hand, are those who rule cannot be held responsible to the will of the people, meaning they don't really include people in their decision-making process. We don't see consent of the governed here, basically. As you see here, there's some different types. We have autocracy, which is a government in which a single person holds unlimited power, and an oligarchy. Power to rule is held by a small, usually self-appointed elite. Modern dictatorships have been totalitarian, which means they exercise complete power all over aspects of human life. Examples: Hitler, Stalin, China, North Korea. Also understand that dictatorships are the oldest and most common form of government known to history. However, they are not commonly used in today's world. Also, all dictatorships are authoritarian, meaning those in power hold absolute and unchallengeable authority of the people. And modern dictatorships have tended to be totalitarian as well. Typically, these institutions are militaristic in character, and they usually gain power by force. All right, a unitary government. A perfect example of unitary government would be the colonies under British rule, or the American colonies, more specifically, under British rule. So in this case, the national government, or Great Britain, which again we were a part of originally, had just about all of the power. Told the American colonies what they can and cannot do. We had to follow their laws. We weren't represented in their government. And we didn't like that. They taxed us with the Stamp Act, Declaratory Act, forced us to house soldiers in our homes with the Quartering Act. Again, they had complete control of our life, and so we decided to declare our independence with the Declaration of Independence and fight the American Revolutionary War, which we were victorious, and then we wrote our first constitution, which was the Articles of Confederation. So that's essentially what a unitary government would look like. This one here would be called a confederate government, which would be very similar to the type of government that we had under the Articles of Confederation, where the states have the power and there is a very weak national government. And essentially under this type of government, as we saw under the Articles, there was a lot of issues. The government was so weak that it could not tax. It could not draft an army, so we had no way to protect our people. Could not regulate trade. Could not, have a currency for all states. Each state could create their own currency, which caused a lot of issues. And I can go on and on and on, but understand that this type of government, Confederate government, was the type of government we had under the Articles, and it was not successful. And that's why essentially we decided to eliminate the Articles and replace it with the Constitution. Federal government. So this is the type of government we have under the Constitution. This is also known as federalism. And this is essentially a sharing of power between state and national governments. We decided to combine the two, strong national government and state governments. National government gets powers that are listed in the Constitution, and states get revised powers that are not listed in the Constitution, respectfully guaranteed by the 10th Amendment. So for federal, all laws, regulations, policies enacted by the federal government must fall within one of the powers that is specifically granted in the Constitution. Essentially, deal with issues affecting the nation. The state, on the other hand, regulate issues of local concern, reserved powers from the 10th Amendment. This gives them the power to govern themselves. This deals with issues they deal with issues affecting the state. The 10th Amendment, any power not given to the 10th Amendment reads, any government not given to the federal government is given to the people or the states. Okay, geographic distribution of governmental power. So with our unitary government, all power belongs to a single central agency, aka Parliament. While local government may be created, they only have the power to do what the central government allows them to do. Federal government is divided between central and several local governments, and the division of power is on a geographic basis. In every system of government, the power to govern is located in one or more places geographically. From this standpoint, three basic forms of government exist: unitary, federal, and confederate governments. Again, unitary is a centralized government. An example would be Great Britain. They have a single central organization, the Parliament, that holds all the government's power. Local governments exist solely to relieve Parliament of burdens it could perform only with difficulty and inconvenience. Parliament could do away with these local governments at any time. British government is democratic and unitary. Federal, both levels of government act directly on the people through their own set of laws, officials, agencies. In the U.S., for example, the national government has certain powers, and the 50 states, unitary in nature, have others. This division of powers is set out in the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution stands above both levels of government. It is the land of the law, and it cannot be changed unless the people acting through both national government and states agree to make that change. Also understand that the division of power, national government, state governments have certain powers which were implied in the Constitution and then also spelled out in the Bill of Rights. Examples: 48 states you can pump your own gas, 2 states you cannot, New Jersey and Oregon. 5 states do not have sales tax, Alaska, Delaware, New Hampshire, Montana, Oregon. And then 16 states are directly involved in selling liquor. Okay. Confederate government, based on alliances where separate states create a central organization that only handles those matters that member states assign to it. Usually they do not have the power to make laws that affect individuals. A confederate structure makes it possible for several states to cooperate in matters of common concern and also retain their separate entities or identities. Close example today would be the European Union. The European Union establishes free trade among its 25 member nations. It launched a common currency, seeks to contribute its members' foreign and defense policies. The United States, under the Articles of Confederation, and the Confederate States of America are also examples of this type of government, as I mentioned earlier. Relationship between the legislative and executive branches. So this is 2 additional types of government. Presidential government. This is an executive and legislative branches, this is when executive and legislative branches are separate, independent of one another, and are co-equal. There will be a chief executive president, and it is independent of the legislature. With president, they hold office for a fixed term and have broad powers not subject to the direct control of legislative branch. The two branches regularly have several powers with which each can block actions by the other branch. In the U.S. Constitution outlines the separation of powers between branches. We use this type. We invented it. Parliamentary government is what Great Britain uses. This is an executive, is made of the Prime Minister, who is the leader of the majority party in Parliament and is chosen by the body. Thus, the executive is chosen by the legislature. The Prime Minister and the Cabinet, often called the government, remain in office only as long as their policies and administration have the confidence of a majority in Parliament. So essentially, how are these different? With a parliamentary system here, the chief executive is drawn from the legislative branch. With the presidential voters elect the chief executive, who is part of the executive branch. So again, with parliamentary, the executive is drawn from the legislative branch. And then over here, the presidential voters elect our chief executive, who is part of the executive branch. So how are they similar? Voters elect the legislative representatives in both cases, as you see here in this image. Voting for president, how does it work? Just a heads up, Electoral College is made up of 538 electors who cast votes to decide the president and vice president of the United States. When voters go to the polls, they choose which candidates receives their state's electors. So voters do not choose the president directly.